Welcome to For Real I Do with Brittany Ellis, the unfiltered side of weddings. From planning truths to vendor insights to navigating design, culture, and family dynamics, this is for couples who crave clarity and vendors ready to elevate. Your insider pass with just a little oversharing. Happy fall, y'all. Welcome back to no longer Beyond Vows and Veils. We have now transitioned our name to For Real I Do. So thank you again so much for joining me. It means so much to have you involved with another season of amazing content that we are here and dedicated to explore and share with you. So today we're going to be talking about why traditional wedding advice is outdated and essentially what I would recommend that you do instead. So if you are like many couples out there, and I totally get it for my type A's, that the minute that ring gets popped on your finger, you immediately go to Google or ChatGPT and you start looking up the checklist, right? Like, how long should I be planning my wedding for? If I want to plan a wedding for, June, what should my timeline look like and things to that end, which is great. I totally get it and no shaming on you. But today I really want to throw that playbook and that checklist that you're probably going to find online out the window, because here's what no one essentially is really going to tell you, which is following traditional wedding planning advice is actually making your life a lot harder. It is not making it easier. And if you're the type of person like myself that really values efficiency and wants results fast, but also doesn't want to have to then go back and redo those results, you're really going to love what we're going to be covering here today. So regardless if you are brand new in your engagement journey, or if you're kind of in the thick of it right now, that's totally fine. I think you're going to get some information that's going to just support you and your decision-making processes as we move through this episode together. So let's first start with a reality check. The 12-month planning checklist that everybody swears by, that I definitely swore by, even like a couple years ago, right? It's not that the framework is broken, it's the way in which we go about the framework that's broken, right? Essentially, there's always this understanding that the first thing that you need to do is tackle the biggest decisions first, which is, the venue or when you're getting married, what attire you're going to wear, what vendors are you going to hire, and really while that all is valid and wonderful, what I feel is the biggest step that's essentially missed that will help dictate and identify all of these decisions and will become your North Star throughout planning is what actually matters to you as a couple. Has anyone ever asked you, since you've been engaged, what is the experience that you're wanting? Or what type of wedding do you think you're going to host? Maybe they asked you the theme, maybe they asked you where, maybe they asked you when, but ultimately the only person that can really identify what type of event that you're looking to host, aside from the obvious, a wedding, I know, is you and your partner. So similar to designing a home, not having an intentional conversation with your partner before you jump into the planning process is like designing a house before you know how you want to actually live in it, right? Like, what is the actual functionality that you need within that home? What actually matters to you to have in that home? So similar with planning, without the values and the intentions intact, ultimately it can feel as if you're just going through the motions, checking off the boxes, but you're not actually fulfilling the intention and the actual goal behind the celebration that you're looking to plan. So the second biggest problem that we see in the early phases of planning is that, and with the old checklist model in mind, is that it doesn't prioritize personality alignment. So traditional planning sort of treats vendors like interchangeable service providers. So what do I mean by this? I mean that when you get into the shopping phase of your planning, so you're in that checklist, right? Got to find a venue and I got to book this venue. You're reaching out to venues and you're reaching out to vendors with no really North Star. What is the intention? What are we actually want? You're just trying to obtain information. And listen, I completely get it. There is no shame. Like, couples don't have a lot of information out there, which is quite frankly why we even decided to launch this podcast. And if you go back to previous seasons, I'll call it, we have a lot of information and knowledge when it comes to choosing your venue, being intentional with that, talking about budget development. So all of that is there for you. So I promise there are resources available. But what happens is when you start just kind of reaching out with no rhyme or reason, number one, in previous episodes, I talk about decision fatigue and burnout, right? So you're just going to like go through the motions and you're going to be so excited and you're going to be expending all this energy. And ultimately, you're not really like refilling the cup because there's no North Star, there's no intention. And so you actually don't know what you're actually looking for. And one photographer in one market is going to be very different from a photographer in another market. Maybe it's all based on the season as well. So you're not going to be able to really get supportive, I feel, information in just trying to shop and shop and shop and collect pricing, because essentially that really just becomes, I don't know, interchangeable and like just like this service provider and just like who's got the best price. And ultimately, that was never a way that you should hire your vendors. So instead, I feel like a better approach would be understanding that the personality of the vendors that you hire is probably going to be one of the most important foundational intentional discussions that you can have early on, right? So what are you actually looking for from the vendor team that goes back to the original intention? So for example, I have a couple right now and they're in the very early stages of their planning. And one of the things that they had shared with me is, Brittany, it's very important to my fiance and I that we hire as much as possible women-owned businesses. And I really thought, good for them. That's fantastic that they have identified that that is really important to them and they really want to stand behind that. I've also had couples that I've said, in lieu of people giving us gifts, we would really like to donate to a charitable cause that we both volunteer for on a regular basis. And we want that to be a message that's incorporated into our celebration. We want guests to know when they arrive that they're actually contributing not only to our celebration and enhancement by being there, but also contributing financially if they're so inclined to offer a donation to a charitable cause that we feel really passionate about and helps identify us as a couple. These essentially are the little golden nuggets that no one can pull out for you. Now, you may have a planner that's obviously going to ask great questions and is going to help to identify and give some personality to your event. But really only you as a couple are able to sit down and have an intentional conversation on what really matters to us for this celebration. And it doesn't have to be a charitable cause. It doesn't necessarily have to be an all woman-owned business in terms of who you're planning. Maybe for you, it's really about the ceremony not being 2 hours long, but really feeling like the commitment that you're actually making that day resonated with you. So you have both the mix and the norms of the traditions that you want to incorporate and bring forward into the chapter of your lives and be representational of your background and your culture, but that also feels symbolic of your union together. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the two of you are getting married. And of course, you are merging families together, but you want to make sure that you're intentional to create space within your wedding weekend of how you can make sure that the guests, your family and your closest friends, are able to have an experience where they're able to bond. And that I feel can only be created through having some of these intentional conversations. Finding the right team takes time, but if you have a planner, it cuts the time in half. Because what do they say? They say that it takes you, what, I think it's like 10,000 hours to master something. And that time actually gets shortened if you are working with someone who already that's their brilliance, right? That's their mastery. So being able to find and secure and find the good personality fits that go with your initial intention conversation, I think is so important because it also allows that planner to pick up what your North Star is and carry that forward so that when they're making the recommendations to you, it's not just in alignment with the overall visuals and the aesthetics and the budget parameters, which are all very important factors, but that's a good personality fit. And it's not going to just feel so transactional at the end of the day, right? Kind of like old school model. Okay. So the third problem is that the old school way of doing planning I hate to say it, but it really did ignore the guest entirely. I have not heard the word guest experience whispered 5 years ago. Certainly did not hear that. Now, it didn't mean that guest comfort was not taken into consideration. It mean that the cuisine or the culinary execution on site wasn't taken into consideration, or the bar tiers. That's not what I'm talking about. That is what I would almost just call baseline hospitality. You've invited these people to come to an event. You're most likely going to feed them and make sure that they're comfortable while they're there. I need an enhancement to their experience when they are on site with you. That is something that I feel is a new playbook, and is one certainly I think that is becoming more robust and carried forward in our industry, which is fantastic to see. Some of the best weddings that you probably have attended, okay, were most likely not the most expensive functions. It's not because they were so grandiose, it's because of the way that you felt as an attendee being there. You felt that everything kind of just flowed. Things were running on time. You felt that when you were outside witnessing their union, that you weren't sweating and dying and couldn't wait to get back inside, or couldn't wait to haul over to the lunch space where you could be in the AC again because they have these beautiful shade canopies, or they have a nice little parasol, or they have a battery operated fan on your seat. You were thought of, and that's guest experience at its very baseline level. Everything above and beyond that, whether that be entertainment that, walks your guest from the ceremony location over to the lunch space, or arrival at cocktails, something that feels very unique and, oh, that's so them. Those are some really great evolutions of guest experience. But what I'm getting at is making sure that when you're creating those foundational conversations and questions back to intention and North Star, that you're really taking some of the basic hospitality principles of how you want your attendees to feel into practice. Because ultimately, if you want your attendees to feel relaxed and comforted and like they're just going to have the time of their lives and it's the best experience ever, then you most likely wouldn't pick a location that's going to be just such a stretch for them to get to, right? So today's couples really understand that the best weddings are experiences where everybody feels included and valued. So here's a stat that will shock you. Couples who follow traditional planning timelines, which I'm talking about is the checklist with no North Star, just going through the motions, report a 40% higher stress level than those who use streamlined, intentional, and priority-based approaches. Why? Because they're not trying to force their unique relationship into a one-size-fits-all system. They are actually curating the intentional checklist that makes the most sense for them. It's almost like putting together your calendar for the week. And you know what your priorities are. You know what you need to be doing to move the needle forward. And so the work feels intentional. It doesn't feel like, oh God, I got to get that done. Got to get that done today. I can't tell you how many couples, and God bless them, if they're working like 60 hours a week, or they're just in the thick of their careers and they have a really the last thing they want to do is they want to come home and they're like, oh my gosh, now I got to clock into my second job and start doing this wedding planning. And I totally get it. But I do promise you that if you really lay the foundations of your intention and you really understand what your North Star is, like not just hosting a wedding, but the type of event that you're creating together, it is not going to feel so redundant and so mechanical, like crossing off things off a list. And it really will feel like you understand why we're moving the needle in this direction, why we're making this next move. And I think it'll just make your planner relationship all that more connective as well. So one of the things that I also want to talk about is just the modern reality check. So today's couples are different, right? So like I was mentioning before, they're moving a million miles a minute. They're being bombarded with wedding inspirations in every direction. And what happens is that when you're moving so fast in your workday and you finally have a lunch break or whatever, and you're scrolling on Instagram and you're looking at somebody else's wedding and you're like, oh my gosh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's wonderful. Make a note of that. Use that as inspiration. When it becomes unhealthy is that when you start comparing the wedding that you're going to have to the wedding that they had. And essentially that comparison is truly the killer of joy. And social media is that comparison on steroids. So while I love good portfolio and I love Pinterest and I love industry leaders, and I love being able to gather insight and inspiration and see what other people are doing, I think that if we spend too much of our time in the comparison standpoint, which is looking at other people's portfolios or wedding galleries and things like that, you sort of lose, your North Star gets a little shaky. You start thinking, well, should we have this type of wedding instead? Or is this the type of event we should have instead? And I think that if you've had that foundational conversation and you understand what direction you're going in, you're going to be able to quickly regroup with your partner to say, hey, I saw this, I'm doubting this. What do you think about this? And you're able to quickly recalibrate and get on the same page again. Whereas if you're a couple who didn't have those foundational questions and you're just going through the motions and you're just checking things off, you're going to continue to get distracted and comparison. And you're not going to be able to move the needle as quickly or as efficiently as you would like to. You'll eventually want to obviously get friends and family's input, but I would just recommend that come after that you've laid that foundation together, not before. Because when you let in outside opinions, they eventually will drive your initial decisions and you're going to end up with somebody else's wedding, right? Wearing your name. So I just think it's very important that you are being mindful of the amount of information that you're taking in today's modern society, right? And all the bells and whistles that the wedding industry brings to your attention. So what does work? Let's break down now the 3 core principles that should guide your wedding planning process in general. So the first principle is priority first planning. So instead of starting with the venue hunting, start with clarifying your values. So ask yourself, what does a successful day look like to us? Is it an intimate dinner? Is it more of a mix and mingle party? Is it an event where our guests can be dancing on the table till 3 o'clock in the morning? Once you're clear on your priorities, every other decision becomes easier. Venue, catering, music, entertainment, they all serve that vision instead of driving it. Principle 2 is the guest experience design. So traditional planning asks, what do we want? Whereas modern planning are asking, what do our guests need to have an amazing time? This shift really changes everything because instead of choosing a venue because it photographs well, you choose it because your elderly relatives can navigate around easy. Instead of 7-course tasting menu, you design food stations so that people will be mixing and mingling. And instead of a rigid timeline, you've built a buffer time so that nothing feels rushed. So this model isn't about pleasing everybody. It's about being intentional who think beyond the ceremony to create a genuine connection. Okay, and a genuine availability for your families and friends to get to know each other over the course of the weekend. And principle 3 is systems over checklist. Here's where we get into the practical application. Checklists tell you what to do and when. You're just going through the motions, checking things off. And systems tell you how to think about decisions so that you can adapt as you go. For example, instead of book photographer 8 months out, the system is identify your documentation priorities first, then find the creative who aligns with that vision. So if having someone with a really great sense of humor that's going to be able to get you both to let your guard down so that you're going to show the best smiles possible on your wedding day as your priority, don't settle for the photographer that you're basically on a consultation with and you're pulling teeth. It's very difficult for you to connect, right? You need to make sure that you're identifying the things that really matter to you, especially when it comes to your vendor hires. So maybe you care more about the candid moments than the post portraits, which is kind of funny because a lot of photographers will say a lot of candid photos are actually posed. But anyway, another discussion. Maybe you want a videographer who captures audio of your vows and not just like cinematic videos and cinematic visuals, right? So look at their portfolio, make sure that it resonates with you. The system approach means that you're making strategic decisions. And again, not just checking the boxes. And honest to God, y'all, when I was engaged very long time ago, when all this was going down for me, I was a checkbox bride. I mean, right? I'm a planner. I'm a type A. I had like a whole thing like, okay, so what I need to do. And it's not that obviously being in the industry, it was a little bit different for me because I kind of like already knew and I had already worked with them. So I had a lot more of a leg up. But I do feel and empathize with brides out there who are obviously not in the industry. It's not that you don't mean to not be intentional. It's just that you've got friends and family constantly hounding you like, When's the wedding? When's the date? Where are you getting married? Have you guys decided this yet? Does it, and I completely can appreciate and understand that pressure, which is why I would highly recommend. I'm not asking you to go have an eat, pray, love moment with your fiance and figure out what your North Star is. I'm asking you to maybe go to dinner with your phones in your bags and just say, let's take 2 hours and let's have a really in-depth conversation about the type of celebration that we really want to host, right? So the new framework in action, let me walk you through how this looks practically, right? So I call it the foundational first framework, right? So it has, again, 3 phases. Phase 1 is the foundation. So foundation is essentially vision alignment. Spend one focus. What must happen for this to feel like a successful celebration? What is the number one thing that had to have happened on your wedding day for it to feel like it was a success for you both? That could be different for everybody, right? But ultimately, was it that nobody had to ask you questions? Nobody was bothered? Okay, well then seamless planning is probably number one for you. It's probably a priority. Was it important that you were able to take your guests to an exotic location because both of you went there and traveled during your time dating together, and you just want your guests to experience this magical location the same way that you did? So just understanding those components are really important. Step 2 is guest experience mapping. So who's coming? What do they need? And how do you want them to interact? How do you want your guests to actually interact with each other? Both, by the way, this includes for the events that you're hosting and opportunities for the events in which you're not hosting, the downtime, right? Step 3 is resource allocation. So based on your priorities, where should most of your budget and energy go? Again, notice that we haven't talked about venues or vendors yet. That is intentional. Phase 2 is infrastructure. So now you're ready to make the decisions, but with clarity. You have your North Star. Your venue choice supports your vision. Your vendor team shares your guest first philosophy, and your timeline reflects your values and not industry defaults. Step 3 is execution. So with strong foundations, the final phase is surprisingly calm. You're refining details, you're not making major decisions, you're communicating final logistics, and you're not scrambling to solve problems. Most importantly, you're enjoying the process because you're not constantly questioned, rather you're doing it right. Okay, this also does come, not a plug-in, but it does come from also having a really great planner to help make sure that they're taking that North Star and carrying it forward for you. And you do have someone that does understand checklists in motion and can ultimately implement that for you. So here's really what happens when couples utilize that result. I had a couple that planned about a 250 person wedding with me out in Coral Gables. And for the first couple weeks, I would say, working together, the one great thing about this couple, I actually learned a lot from them, is that they actually came to me already have clearly had that intentional conversation. They were clear that they wanted to hire a female priest only. They were clear that they wanted to make sure that both of their cultures and their union felt very specific to them. So they customized every single step a part of that ceremony. They really wanted their guests to feel as if they had experienced South Florida while they were in town. So it was important to them to have an off property incorporated into the wedding weekend. And ultimately, they didn't want their guests to feel like they were shuttled around. So it was very important to them that while they had an offsite property, having had gone to weddings where they were on the bus for 45 minutes, they wanted it to be basically within a 10-minute driving distance or less from the main host property where most of the attendees were staying. Understanding that their North Star was their guests to experience the area, for them to have a ceremony and someone to lead the ceremony that felt authentic and specific to them, really became the North Star in terms of guiding the decisions, which ultimately would, of course, impact how we structured budget, would, of course, impact the venues that we would recommend, the vendors that we would recommend. Because I'm not going to select somebody such as a photographer or something like that that doesn't do well with moving around a lot or isn't used to shooting multicultural weddings. There's going to be a rhyme or reason to the individuals that we would then otherwise present to this couple, right? So that's just one example. And ultimately, I think that it's important. I could list multiple examples forever, but really is if you're feeling overwhelmed by traditional wedding advice, here's really the thing that you can do right now, just to summarize this episode, is first to stop consuming generic wedding content. Okay, so unfollow the Instagram accounts that make you feel behind or inadequate. Just stop following them, right? If they're providing you stress instead of inspiration, stop following them. Click unfollow. Second is do the vision alignment exercise, right? That we had mentioned previously. So block out 2 hours with your partner, no phones, no distractions, and get clear about what actually matters to you both for this celebration. And third is question every must-have on your current list and ask yourself, does this serve our vision and our guest experience, or are we doing it because we think that we should? I think that this is so, so important. Stop shooting all over yourself. Give yourself a break. Give yourself the permission to host an event the way that you would like to host it, and then present that to your friends and family after you both are on the same page and in alignment. And finally, remember that your wedding should feel like an amplified version of how you would normally celebrate together, not a performance of how someone else's idea would go. Not a performance of how their romance would be played out. It's not somebody else's wedding with your name on it. So ultimately, I think it's really important that you have a wedding that is reflective of an amplified version of how you would usually enjoy celebrating. So in closing, the wedding industry wants you to believe that more is always better. More time, more vendors, more details, more stress. But the best weddings aren't the most complicated ones. They are simply the ones that are the most intentionally planned. So next, we're going to be diving into even more supportive topics that can support you on this incredible planning journey, because it is such a magical time and you are only engaged for such a short period of time. So I hope that this podcast is of support to you. And as always, DM us. We love hearing from you. And happy Friday.